Hello everyone, and welcome to the weekly DeSmogCAST, where we clear the PR pollution that clouds climate science and shed some light on the biggest environmental stories that you need to know about. I'm your host, Farron Cousins, and joining me this week we have Carol Linnitt, the Managing Editor and Director of Research for DeSmog Canada, Emma Gilchrist, the Executive Director of DeSmog Canada, and very special guest this week, Keith Stewart from the Climate and Energy Campaign of Greenpeace Canada. Thank you all for joining us this week. And Keith, you're the guest. I want to go ahead and get started with you here. We've had some very, I guess you'd call it disturbing developments out of Canada last few weeks and months. Basically, tell us the story. I mean, we're starting to see that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are, I guess you would say, kind of targeting environmentalists. Go ahead, give us the backstory on what's happening up there.
So I was reading a story in La Presse newspaper, it's a French language newspaper, and they have got a whole bunch of RCMP documents, and they're focused on sort of one of them, but there's like two lines on just like, oh, we also got this 40-page document on the anti-petroleum movement. So I contacted the reporter and I said, hey, could I get a copy of that? He sent it to me, and when I got it, I started laughing because, you know, you can read it on our website, you can read the DeSmog website. It really is so poorly written. One of the reporters I sent to said, you know, did the person who wrote this have a high school education? And it's got all sorts of kind of like crazy language in it because it's talking about this, what they call an anti-petroleum movement. And this movement asserts that burning fossil fuels is changing the climate, which they claim is an environmental problem. And based on this purported problem, these people are using social media to foment an anti-petroleum movement, an ideology, which really was sort of like, you know, are they wearing tinfoil hats? Why don't they walk down the hall to Environment Canada, ask them if climate change is real? Why not, you know, perhaps ask the Pentagon about it being a threat multiplier? All those types of things, and I would have kind of just laughed it off, except, you know, this is coming out just as Canada is looking at a new anti-terrorism law. We had a couple of incidents here in Canada. The government is using this to say we need tough new laws on terrorism. Sounds like good politics going to an election. However, this law is less about terrorism and more about granting sweeping new powers to the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service to go after people who engage in activities the government doesn't like, including what they call threats to critical infrastructure. And that RCMP document is a critical infrastructure threat assessment. And what it is saying is people who claim that there's a problem called climate change are a threat to the petroleum industry and have to be dealt with as anti-petroleum extremists.
Basically, if I'm hearing you correctly, oil is such a vital resource. We refuse to do anything to get ourselves off of oil. So rather than taking the, you know, more responsible route of, say, I don't know, and double down on renewables, instead what we're going to do is make sure that any kind of dissent, you get classified as, you know, anti-petroleum, as they call it, and then you, I guess, are officially a threat. And so they can keep tabs on you. What do they do once you're classified, you know, as a threat there?
So under the new, so right now they do keep tabs on us. We know this. There's a bunch of complaints in on that. There's, you know, the head actually of the review committee of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service had to resign because it came out that at the same time that CSIS was spying on environmental groups who were opposed to pipelines, he took a job as a lobbyist for one of the pipeline companies, and that was viewed as, you know, a little too much even for the Harper government, a little too embarrassing. He's a former Harper government cabinet minister. But the types of powers and avails, they can engage in all types of surveillance. They can break the law. They can, in fact, you know, violate the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They can do things like freeze your bank account. They can intercept your mail. They can try and frame you for things. They can, you know, we had an incident in the 90s where the RCMP blew up a building to try and blame it on someone they thought was attacking the facilities of this one pipeline company. But when the RCMP does that kind of thing, they have to later defend it in open court. They have to go before a judge and say, we did this is why we did it. It becomes part of the evidence base. Under the anti-terrorism law, all of these things are adjudicated in these secret courts where the person who is being under surveillance, being accused, doesn't have anyone to represent him, doesn't know what's happening. And there's no kind of recourse for those people to try and get their names off of that list of extremists, etc. So, there's sweeping laws in Canada. Edward Snowden just did a thing yesterday where saying Canada has the weakest oversight of any, democratic country in the world of its spy agency. So what we're saying is, you got to get your definitions a lot tighter. Who are you defining as a threat? And we think climate change should be a threat, not the climate activists. And you have to have proper oversight and review, because you never want to pass legislation which assumes that everyone in power will exercise perfect judgment. We've seen that movie before. We know how it turns out.
Well, it sounds like this anti-terrorism law is just a yet another attempt, kind of like the United States with the Patriot Act, to just basically do away with due process. It's not on the state to prove that you did something. It seems like they're trying to make it to where you have to prove that you didn't. And speaking of threats, in what is the greatest segue ever, Carol, you don't seem like a threat, but they can neither confirm nor deny that they classify you as such. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an interesting overlap. DeSmog Canada decided to submit some access to information or freedom of information requests to CSIS, our version of the CIA. So this is our major spy agency, and what we want to know is, are we on a list? Are we being monitored? We know that environmental organizations are being monitored. We know that activists are being monitored, and we know from this leaked RCMP document that new media, social media, is being also investigated as an aspect of this anti-petroleum movement, as they're calling it. And so, we're really interested to see, is DeSmog Canada in any way a part of this? Or, can people find out if they're actually being targeted for monitoring and surveillance in this way? And of course, we got our responses back saying, CSIS can neither confirm nor deny that any of the records we had requested actually exist. And the reason that they cited for this this information dodge was that if those records or if that information did exist, it would be exempt from disclosure because it would have to do with the detection or suppression of hostile activities in Canada. So it's interesting. It's a little bit of a peek behind the curtain in a way, or maybe a non-peek behind the curtain, because with this RCMP document, what we're seeing is that there is this incredible overlap happening between industry and government and Canada's security apparatus through the police and through CSIS. And at the same time, there's a complete lack of transparency and disclosure. So what I did with these documents was go to some of the experts and say, is there any way that people could find out more information about this? Is this the best that any Canadian citizen could do at a time when we're really concerned about spying? And basically the answer is, yeah, we can't expect much more than this can neither confirm nor deny response.
Unbelievable. And while we're talking about the industry essentially being protected here with this anti-petroleum classification, you've got Kinder Morgan up there, and Emma, Kinder Morgan has not wasted any time trying to use this anti-petroleum extremist line to avoid, I guess, releasing their disaster response plan. Tell us how those two even coincide.
Yeah, so basically what's been happening is Kinder Morgan, which is a Texas-based company, actually is trying to build a new pipeline from the Alberta oil sands or tar sands to the west coast of Canada to around the Vancouver area. And what they have been saying is when the province has asked for their emergency oil spill response plans, they've said we can't release those because of national security concerns. And this is where it comes into, pipelines fitting into this critical infrastructure. So while Kinder Morgan is saying that they can't release the oil spill response plan in Canada, they've actually released those plans in full right across the border for the same pipeline in Washington State. So DeSmog Canada broke that story a couple of weeks ago now, and it's got quite a bit of pickup in terms of just how absurd it is that the specifics of oil spill response are available right across the border. So things like where the pipeline is, where it crosses rivers, how many oil spill responders would be available to get to a spill, what companies are responsible. Whereas in BC, when the province asked for these documents, the company actually redacted things as simple as who the responders would be. What company is expected to respond to a spill? So what the province has been saying is, look, the information is not here for us to be able to properly assess whether you can actually respond to an oil spill effectively, and therefore we can't really render a judgment on the project that you've proposed. They've been asking Canada's National Energy Board to compel the company to release these plans. The National Energy Board has kind of been saying, and now in response to this outrage over the plans being available in Washington, the Energy Board is saying, well, we're not really happy with this. And they're saying that they're going to look to actually force the company to have to disclose that information in Canada.
And so right now, though, Kinder Morgan is actually trying to get itself under this umbrella of safety through, I guess, this anti-terrorism bill by saying, maybe they're not expressly saying, but they don't want to release their plan because if they do, and these anti-petroleum extremists, if they know who the responders are, maybe something could happen to them. If they know the route of the pipeline or anything like that, maybe they could hurt it. And all it is, it's a smokescreen. It's so they don't have to release their plan, which, as we've seen so many times, when they won't release it, typically means it doesn't exist. And real quick, a closing thought to each one of you. Emma, let's start with you. Why is the Canadian government, with this anti-terrorism bill, trying to do the bidding of the industry?
Well, the Canadian government is really doing the bidding of the industry on many fronts right now, and Canada has a mandate essentially to become this energy superpower. And the people in charge of our country right now, I think they really do see environmentalists as a threat to infrastructure. The problem is that they're conflating in many very reasonable people, in fact, the majority of Canadians who have sentiments around safety of pipelines and whatnot, and they're conflating that with a few radical extremists and not differentiating between the two.
Keith, your closing thoughts on this?
This really is a government that divides people into allies and adversaries. And we actually have a document that we released publicly, the Oil Sands Advocacy Strategy, where they had a table, and they had under adversaries, they had environmental and Aboriginal groups, and under allies, they had the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And when a government goes in with this kind of you're either with us or against us, they tend to they find a lot of enemies. And this is a government which sees enemies everywhere and doesn't really have respect for democratic debate, democratic dissent. And that's something we really need to get back to in this country, and we definitely do not need to entrench laws which make dissent somehow a crime.
And Carol, let's end with you. What's your overall thoughts on this as we close here?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's a shame that so much time and energy is being wasted on these laws that are heading in the wrong direction, on government agendas that are heading in the wrong direction. We've seen massive increases in the efficacy and the availability and the relative inexpense of clean energy. Canada has absolutely missed the boat. We shouldn't have been trying to be a dirty energy superpower. In the last few years, we could have made great gains being a clean energy superpower, and we've absolutely missed the boat. And now we're seeing these desperate attempts to hold on to power, in a sinking ship. And I think both Keith and Emma are right that these desperate attempts are looking increasingly so, and it's creating a lot of enemies. And certainly the Harper government is up for a tough election heading into the fall of 2015 when Canada has its next federal election.
Well, I don't see extremism from any of you. I see passion, I see intelligence, and I see fortitude. And so I wouldn't classify any of you as extremists, but we certainly are very, very glad that you guys and everybody from DeSmog and everybody from Greenpeace and everybody from all these other organizations, glad that we have you all out there, keeping up this fight for us. And that's all the time we have for today, but all of these stories that we discussed are available on DeSmog Canada, online at desmog.ca. Don't forget to check out desmogblog.com and DeSmog UK, and we will see you all next week. Thank you, all of you, for being with us.